A startling turn of events ripped apart the narrative that Doug Weiss and Joni Lamb had believed was finally progressing. Lisa Weiss, Doug's ex-wife, has taken center stage and revealed unexpected secrets. Her remarks do more than merely spark rumors. They threaten to destroy everything that Joni and Doug had fought to keep safe. Her discoveries have the potential to completely alter the course of events, leaving Daystar itself, their future, and their reputations in jeopardy. Doug Weiss appeared to be the epitome of a Christian leader and husband to the outer world. He confidently took the stage to teach couples how to prioritize God, maintain faithfulness, and safeguard their marriages, their residences. People believed his guidance, bought his books, and admired him. He was seen by many as the man who knew everything there was to know about commitment and love. Only Lisa Weiss, his wife of almost 30 years, was aware of the stark reality that lay beneath that well-preserved exterior. From the start, Lisa had been there. She supported Doug's expanding ministry, kept their home together, and reared their kids. Lisa kept everything in check at home whenever he traveled to speak at conferences or churches. Their lives appeared to be full and blessed from the outside. However, inside, the Lisa saw her own deterioration behind the walls of their home. Though invisible, she was there. In name but not in spirit, a partner. The lengthy journeys and the late hours weren't the most difficult for Lisa. It was the sense of emptiness she experienced upon Doug's arrival home. He was preoccupied but not cruel, constantly anticipating the next sermon, book, or event. On stage, he would discuss the importance of loving your spouse. At home, however, he hardly met her gaze. Lisa frequently sat on the other side of the dining table, hoping to connect with someone, simply to feel as though she was eating by herself. The disparity between their private lives and Doug's public persona only served to exacerbate the sorrow. Lisa concealed the pain in her heart by smiling and nodding when others complimented her on being married to such a holy man. They didn't see the quiet in their home or the nights Lisa sobbed herself to sleep, but they did see the happy faces in pictures and the ideal marriage at church functions. She was losing herself in addition to Doug. Lisa persuaded herself that things would improve for years. She attempted to be the encouraging wife she believed God was calling her to be, prayed, and remained patient. However, the reality was indisputable. She didn't live with the same man behind closed doors as the one everyone saw on stage. Doug's lessons on love won him admiration. The woman nearest to him, however, felt unnoticeable. Lisa kept the secret to herself. Beneath Doug's ministry's polished exterior lies a secret. Even if the world applauded his remarks, Lisa had to deal with the agonizing fact that she never appeared to hear them. I'm being destroyed by him. And I replied, no, Joni. There has been an essay and everything because of something really horrible that happened. Oh no. Then she defended Pete. He has caused him a great deal of pain. That Pete is a good man. Rebecca and JW wrote a lengthy letter about him. She claimed that Susie was a pathological liar, and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is now deceased but has a record, and that she had attacked her. What Joni was saying to me shocked me, so I begged her to make amends with Jonathan for herself. The hope would be that. I saw that side of her, and I can only say that it's not like the Joni on TV, nor is it like that kind person. However, I did catch a glimpse of that person in the video when she mentioned that Jonathan has been running a smear campaign, and I thought, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan running a smear campaign, but I had seen him for years. Lisa Weiss lived in the background of Doug's ministry, bearing the burden of a truth that few would have believed, but Lisa knew better. She lived in the quiet place behind the public image where the story was very different. At first, she thought she could handle it, telling herself that his absence was temporary, that the distance between them was just temporary. Doug Weiss was a well-respected Christian counselor, the man with all the answers for broken marriages and struggling families. He wrote books, gave speeches, and sat on television stages, speaking authoritatively about loyalty, sacrifice, and love. The silence grew louder over the years, but it wasn't the kind that comes from peace. Rather, it was the kind that comes from being unseen, unheard, and forgotten. Lisa carried that silence for decades, protecting not only Doug's reputation, but also her own family. She kept herself from speaking out every time she considered doing so, because she believed that it was part of her calling. After all, Doug was busy helping others and dedicating his time to saving marriages across the nation. Believe her? Doug was charming, convincing, and trusted by thousands. She was afraid that if she spoke the truth, people would perceive her as resentful or disloyal, and the ministry they had built together would fail. So she swallowed her pain, put on a brave front, and let the world believe in the image Doug had worked so hard to create. But on the inside, the weight was too much. Lisa was breaking. The woman who had once dreamed of a life of faith and purpose was now invisible in her own home, and her prayers became frantic cries for her husband to notice her. For God. Then everything changed, and after years of silence, Lisa decided she could no longer bear it any longer. In 2024, she broke her silence and spoke publicly for the first time about her experience, her calm voice piercing the polished veneer that Doug had worn for so long. And she wasn't angry, not in the way people might have expected. So she didn't spit out accusations or try to tear him down. She wanted to mend what was broken, to keep her own heart from giving up completely. But the healing never materialized. She told the world how she had prayed, sacrificed, and poured herself into their marriage, only to feel like she was the only one fighting to keep it alive. Her words were shocking to many because this wasn't the Doug Weiss they knew. This wasn't the picture-perfect marriage they had admired. And she talked about the years of loneliness, the innumerable nights she spent waiting for him to return home, and the unending hope that something would change. Instead, she told the truth as she had lived it, plain, painful, and real. But for Lisa, it was freedom. She was seen and heard for the first time in decades, and her silence broke, allowing the truth to come to light. What was even more powerful about her revelation was that she wasn't looking for retribution. She wasn't trying to ruin Doug's reputation or destroy the ministry they had built together. Instead, she was seeking something much more significant: healing. She wanted other women to know that they weren't alone, that even when someone appears flawless on the outside, the truth can be very different behind closed doors. "What's next for Jada?" she asked. As her words spread, people started to doubt the image they had trusted for so long. Could it be that the man who preached so passionately about saving marriages hadn't been able to save his own? Could it be that the truth behind the public figure was more complicated, more human, and more broken than anyone imagined? Lisa's story resonated because it wasn't just about Doug. It was about the countless women who had felt unseen in their marriages. What do you think? She wanted to remind people that true love isn't about appearances or performances, but rather about being present, attentive, and faithful in the everyday moments. The fact that she spoke up gave voice to those who had been silent for too long, and it served as a reminder that no matter how carefully something is kept hidden, truth eventually finds a way to surface. For Doug, Lisa's revelation was devastating, and her words caused his carefully constructed image to crumble. For Joni Lamb, who had recently entered a new marriage with Doug, the timing was explosive. Suddenly, the very woman who had shared Doug's life for over 30 years was questioning the foundation of their union. However, for Lisa, the moment wasn't about them. It was about taking back her own identity. After years of being a shadow in her own life, she bravely and honestly stepped into the light, and in doing so, she not only revealed the flaws in Doug's story, but also started the process of healing her own. The secrets were exposed, the silence was broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lisa Weiss felt as though someone had torn the ground out from under her feet when she first learned of Doug's new marriage. She had been his wife for more than 30 years, raising children, running a household, and quietly supporting his ministry for decades. The speed at which it happened made the shock unbearable. Their divorce was barely finalized when the news broke that Doug Weiss had remarried, and not just to anyone. He had married Joni Lamb, a well-known Christian television host who Lisa had known for years, and who had also lived in the same ministry circles. Together, they stood in the spotlight, teaching others about faithfulness, commitment, and fighting for your marriage no matter how difficult it got. And now, after all those years, he was standing beside another woman publicly, joyfully, as if the previous 3 decades had never even occurred. Lisa had barely had time to process the end of her marriage before she was forced to see her ex-husband stepping into a new one. The man who had spent years telling others not to give up on their marriages had walked away from his own, and almost immediately started a new chapter with someone else. It looked like a new beginning, a new love story wrapped in God's blessing. Pictures of their wedding were posted online, featuring happy faces, gorgeous dresses, and captions about God's timing and new seasons. Lisa sat alone in her living room, scrolling through social media. It was not just about losing him. It was about the betrayal of everything he had stood for, everything he had preached, and everything they had once promised to one another. The betrayal was not just personal. It was public. Lisa had spent years preserving Doug's reputation, keeping quiet about her own suffering, carrying the silence so that his ministry could shine, and she had given up her own needs so that he could be the man everyone looked up to. The sight of Doug and Joni smiling together, surrounded by friends and ministry partners, left her gasping for air. The hardest part was explaining it to her children, who were old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to read the posts online and see the photos. Although the world was celebrating him as if nothing had happened, church leaders congratulated him, and Christian media called his marriage to Joni a testimony of God's goodness. Lisa felt erased from the story, as if her decades of loyalty and sacrifice had been written out of the narrative completely. Lisa's heart broke as she tried to shield them from the pain, but she saw it in their eyes, the confusion, the hurt, the sense of being left behind. Because it wasn't just her world that had been shattered. It was theirs as well. For Lisa, the shock of Doug's new marriage was about more than just timing. It was about everything it represented, about watching the man she had once loved. They asked her questions that she couldn't answer. Why did Dad move on so quickly? Why does it seem like he's happier now than he was with us? The timeline raised questions Lisa couldn't ignore. Had Doug and Joni been emotionally connected before the divorce? Had their relationship begun, while Lisa was still fervently praying for her own marriage to be saved? The speed of it all felt too quick, too convenient. It was about seeing the values he preached so passionately on stage seemingly tossed aside in his personal life, about realizing that while he was smiling for cameras with his new wife, she was left to grieve alone, invisible to the people who had once celebrated their marriage as an example of godly love. The public's reaction only made the wound worse. Everywhere she looked, people were praising Doug and Joni and calling their story inspirational, while Lisa was still struggling to get out of bed some mornings, still crying herself to sleep at night, still trying to rebuild her life from the ruins. She couldn't prove anything, but the doubts lingered like shadows in her mind, even if nothing inappropriate had happened before the divorce. She felt that their decades together had been disposable, that she was just a chapter he could close without looking back, as though she had never been, as though her marriage had never mattered, as though her suffering was insignificant because Doug had already moved on. But in the silence of those agonizing days, Lisa started to see something she had not before. The shock of Doug's new marriage, as devastating as it was, made her confront a reality she had been avoiding for years. Their marriage had been broken long before the papers were signed, and she had been bearing the burden of it alone, praying for a miracle, hoping for change, and hoping for a miracle. Doug had already moved on in his heart before he stood beside Joni at the altar, and despite the pain, Lisa started to realize that his decisions did not define her value. She began to take small steps forward, choosing to rebuild her life around the God who had never abandoned her, rather than the man who had left her. Doug's new marriage may have shocked Lisa, but it also set her free. Free from the shadows, free from the silence, free from carrying the illusion of a perfect life that never really existed. The shock was painful, but gradually she began to reclaim herself. She reminded herself of the decades she had given, the love she had poured out, the faithfulness she had displayed, and the fact that none of it was wasted, even if it wasn't honored. It was a journey where Lisa could finally be seen as herself, not as someone's wife or shadow. Lisa's pain was gradual, like a steady drip in the roof of a house you've loved for years, and you tell yourself it's small, that it will dry up, and that it will pass. For Lisa, years of loneliness and quiet disappointment accumulated until the day when everything fell apart, and Doug's remarriage to Joni Lamb was only the last blow, the one that made all the hidden cracks impossible to ignore. Lisa knew the truth was different. She wasn't bitter when she told it. She had just lived a reality that didn't match the picture others saw. Doug was kind, yes, and committed to his ministry, but he wasn't really present with her. She was the anchor at home, raising their kids and running the little things no one saw while he traveled, preached, and built his platform as a Christian marriage counselor. People knew Doug as the authority on loyalty, the man who taught about commitment and covenant, and they trusted him, believing he lived out what he preached. Lisa had long felt like a shadow in her own marriage, invisible to the man who should see her the most. But she stayed. She prayed. She clung to the memories of their youthful, idealistic days. She reminded herself that marriage was about sacrifice, about sticking by each other through pain. She told herself that if she was just strong enough, patient enough, or understanding enough, Doug would notice her again. But the distance only grew, and by the time the divorce arrived, Lisa was already exhausted. The news of Doug's quick remarriage to Joni, however, felt like a knife. It wasn't just that he had moved on. It was the speed of it, the joy of it, the public celebration of it. To the world, it appeared to be a new love story, a testament to God's timing. But to Lisa, it seemed as though her entire life had been erased in the blink of an eye. While friends and church leaders congratulated Doug, social media was ablaze with happy wedding pictures and blessings for the happy couple. Lisa sat by herself in her living room, scrolling through those images, her heart breaking again. The world seemed to have moved on without her. The pain was sharp, but multi-layered. Lisa had poured herself into supporting Doug's ministry, raising their kids and keeping the family afloat. And now it seemed as if none of it mattered. She felt replaced, forgotten, and even her children's questions broke her heart. Seeing the same pictures, reading the same posts, and not understanding. Lisa tried her best to protect them, but she was unable to keep them safe from the confusion, and their loss only made her own worse. However, even in the darkest moments, Lisa found something unexpected: resilience. At first, it manifested itself in small ways, like a morning walk when she didn't want to get out of bed, a journal entry when the pain was too much to bear alone, or a prayer that wasn't just for healing, but also for the strength to keep going. Gradually, Lisa realized that Doug's decisions didn't define her value. Her decades of devotion, love, and sacrifice were not erased by his new marriage. She had a story of her own, one that was still developing. Lisa began to reclaim the parts of herself that she had lost. After years of being Doug's wife, the one who stood in the background while he was in the spotlight, she started to rediscover who she was without that label. She made friends who genuinely cared for her, people who saw her as a woman with her own identity rather than as an extension of her husband. And she found solace in her faith, in the God who had never abandoned her, even when she felt abandoned by the person she trusted most, and she started to dream again. Not about the life she had lost, but about the life that was still waiting for her. Her fortitude did not make the pain go away. She still had mornings when the weight of her loss was pressing hard against her chest, and nights when she sobbed herself to sleep. Healing wasn't easy or quick, but with each little step forward, Lisa showed herself that she could persevere, that she could survive even the deepest wounds, and that she was no longer living in silence or fading behind the success of others. She was regaining her voice, sharing her story, not out of retaliation but out of truth, and a new beginning resulted from that truth. Lisa understood that although Doug and Joni's marriage may have shocked the world, it also liberated her, freed her from the burden of maintaining appearances, freed her from the illusion that she had to keep up appearances, and most importantly, freed her to start over. She started creating a life that was her own, one that was based not on the approval of others, but on her own faith, strength, and dignity. Lisa's suffering was genuine, her fortitude was evident, and her new beginning was. The story that had once left her feeling erased had now given her a platform to remind others that no matter how profound the betrayal, no matter how heavy the grief, there is always hope for healing, for strength, and for a new chapter. It was more than just survival. It was rebirth. She had endured betrayal, loss, and public erasure, but she was still standing, and not just standing, but thriving again.